So, welcome everyone. My name is Kelly Coughlan. I am the Senior Career Manager at the Office of Career Services within the Costello College of Business. Hopefully, you are joining us for salary negotiation, although, really, we are going to talk about negotiation strategies for other things as well. And I am joined by Ty from Stanley Martin Homes, who partners with us quite a bit. So, Ty, if you could do a quick introduction, a little bit about your background and about
Mhm.
Stanley Martin Homes, because one of the things I really want to emphasize here, when we are job searching, we tend to kind of get that tunnel vision. So if I'm a marketing student, I'm going to look for marketing firms. And if I'm, business analyst, I'm going to look at Deloitte, or accounting, I'm going to look at Big Four only and that kind of stuff. And I'm here to tell you, any of these major companies have all those roles and more. And so that's what I really want to bring. Ty from Stanley Martin Homes, you are not necessarily going to be recruited to swing a hammer, although if that's your interest, I have the background in construction myself, so I love that part. But Ty, if you could take it away.
Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. And hello, GMU. Thank you for allowing me to come present to you guys. Kelly says I work for Stanley Martin Homes as their college and military outreach manager. I've been with Stanley Martin Homes for almost 5 years. In September, it'll be 5 years. And throughout that time, I started out as a corporate recruiter, then a manager of talent acquisition, and now I've moved into this role to reach out to college students, graduates, alumni, and veterans who are transitioning out of the military about opportunities with Stanley Martin. Just to give you a quick background, I did 25 years in the Army, retired as a colonel, enjoyed everything that I did there. And then for the last 10 years, I've been doing recruiting. I've done recruiting and talent acquisition in the hospitality industry, in the healthcare industry, and now in the construction industry. And I love what I do. I love helping students. I love helping veterans get job opportunities in their career field. So for this opportunity, for this time and speech, I've worked with Kelly, great team members there at GMU. I think if you guys take full advantage of what they offer, especially when you're doing the job search, whether it's career fairs or job applications, they have a great system. They got great processes in place to help you. Stanley Martin is a residential construction company, and our mission statement is to design and build homes that people love at a price they can afford. We're in a seven-state region from Maryland all the way down to Florida. Our corporate office is in Reston. Like Kelly said, if you're interested in the construction management side, great, because that's what we, obviously is part of our core profession, but we also have sales positions. We're also going to have positions at our corporate office in IT, marketing, accounting, finance, all those support systems that support the core business of building homes, right? So keep us in mind if we or any business really when you're ever looking at a company that they have all those core support systems and departments that support their businesses. So happy to talk with you guys because this is a great topic to talk about, especially as it comes to negotiating offers when you get your first offer or you're moving it through your career. Always ask if there's an opportunity for a pay increase because if you don't, the answer is always going to be no. All right. Having said that, I'll turn it over to Kelly and we can start the presentation.
Perfect. So we are going to talk about negotiation strategies. And of course, as we just talked about, salary is not the only thing that you can negotiate. So let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. So that was a great line from JFK. Here's a quick little quiz for you. What percentage of interviewees didn't negotiate their last offer? And I have been there and done it. I've successfully negotiated and I've left money on the table by not doing it, and it's not a good feeling. So let's take a peek. More than half. So anybody who is over half, you're right on. More than half, 58% of men and 61% of women say they didn't ask for higher pay the last time they were hired. Ty, I mean, and from the recruiting standpoint, I'm sure you see this a lot. I can tell you, I have been in this situation where I was applying for a job. I was in the final interview with the president, and she said, "Here's what we're planning to offer you." And I just saw stars in my eyes, and it didn't even occur to me to ask for more money because it was so much more than I was currently making. And I was like, where do I sign? And then, of course, as I learned more and more, I thought, oh, how much did I leave on the table? Because as we're going to bring this up later, all of your raises are based on what you're currently making. So the higher you start, obviously that makes a big difference in the long run. And then I have been in positions where I did successfully negotiate either higher pay or we can't really increase your salary, but we can do a hiring bonus. And that, got me where I wanted to be financially and all that kind of stuff. I've also been in the situation where on my application, put, what my fantasy range of what I wanted to make. And somebody come back to me and said, we would have hired you, except that the lower end of your range was still above where we were hiring. And I thought I would have taken this job for $5,000 less. So you want to be really careful when you're throwing out kind of the numbers that you're not so low that if you get the job, you can't pay your bills. But, if there was a little wiggle room there, you could have managed it. Ty, what do you see on your end when folks are negotiating, people who don't bother, people who have done the research, or people who are pie in the sky? Can I have $200,000, please?
For college students, college graduates, I see more they won't negotiate or they don't ask. So then they just take it and then, have regrets later. That's what I've seen. Once they get into their profession and moving along and they're starting to see how negotiations work, then they're more apt to negotiate. Ladies, don't leave money on the table. I would tell you that a lot of times, unfortunately, they won't negotiate. Men tend to over negotiate, right? And what I'll share with you is I've only seen in the years I've seen one person get not only they asked for more than they expected, and then they didn't get the job. All
Mm.
right, because they oversold it, right? They started at one price and then when they got down to the end, they went way off the range. And then the hiring manager got offended. Other than that, what I've seen is that people typically will say, this is our final offer, either take it or leave it, or we don't, we can't support that, but we can negotiate something else. So that's what I would share with you. If you don't
Gotcha.
ask, it's not gonna, the answer is always gonna be no.
That's
Don't
right.
don't be afraid to negotiate, especially throw it out there. The worst thing they could say is no, this is where our offer is and go from there.
Yep. What's the phrase? You'll always miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So, why would we negotiate? And as I just mentioned, too, had I been in that position where I'd successfully negotiated, all of my raises were based on what that starting salary was. So, how much are you leaving on the table by not negotiating that? So, in other words, the higher you start, the higher your salary gets over time.
Correct.
So when do we want to negotiate? We certainly, Ty, you've worked plenty of those career fairs here and stuff. And, obviously I'm assuming one of the big turnoffs is when somebody comes up and says, well, what does it pay? Well, what's the pay? Because then you feel like their priorities aren't in the right spot. I think Virginia, we're starting to see more of sort of that salary, at least advertised in some of those postings so that we're not wasting each other's time. The appropriate time to negotiate, of course, is when you know they want you, because then you have a little more power. Ty, do you want to speak to that point?
Yep, yep. So definitely the career fair is not the time to negotiate. Certain states will show the range. They have to. Maryland does that. Virginia is optional. So take full advantage of that. Also do your research. I'll share with you from a hiring manager's perspective, we have to work within a range. Typically, we start with the minimum. So if the range is from 65 to 80, the offer is going to start at 65 unless otherwise shown that you can earn a little bit more. And that's where I would share with you, you have to ask some open-ended questions, about the range or about what the salary, demands. And then also I always say, if I work really hard and I'm top performer, where can I start? That kind of thing. So there's opportunities. I think at the right time is when you are in the final stages. Obviously, you want to express your interest in the beginning, but in the final stages of the interview, final stages when they're coming to you as an offer, obviously you want to have a range in mind. And then when it's offered to you, don't be so excited that you just jump and sign. Take a deep breath, wait 24 to 48 hours and tell them that you're going to get back to you and go from there.
So don't be Kelly, is what what I heard there. Don't just see those stars in your eyes and
Mhm.
sign up.
Can I just say one thing, Kelly? You are
Yeah.
so correct because a person that works for me, We were moving her up to another position, and I knew the range, but she didn't ask. And they offered her the position with the range. And I kind of hinted, "Are you sure that's what you want? Because there's opportunities." And she was like, "This is more money than I'm making now." I was like, "Okay." Right. And then later on to find out, I said, I couldn't tell you. I really could not. I was bent, beholden to not share that information, but always negotiate. There's always an opportunity to negotiate. So don't leave money on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we'll go along, there's other things you can negotiate for, if there's no wiggle room on that salary.
Correct.
So, I have a question up here for you. Have you ever successfully negotiated something? Doesn't have to be salary. And if so, what did you successfully negotiate? And if you have never ever negotiated, I'd like to hear that too. As we're talking here, it never occurred to me to negotiate.
Mm.
We've certainly seen that too. So, anyone pop in the chat here? Yep. Ah, Rodney, I love it. Successfully negotiated time off. Oh, Eliza, that's awesome. And a successfully negotiated school being paid for. That is great. I know a
Mm.
lot of companies certainly offer that too, that tuition reimbursement piece. That is a really great thing to take advantage of. In fact, I'll see that a lot with our MBA students in particular. Their employer is paying for it. So, as Ty has mentioned already, right? If you don't ask, the answer is always no. And that's from a Google recruiter. So, step one is really what is the range? What is this magical number? Now, if they have at least posted a salary that gives you a hint, but a lot of times they won't. Here are a couple websites. There's Salary Glassdoor. I have absolutely used myself many times because that is for real. We can use it in many different ways, but people post, here's where I was employed, here's the role I was in, here's the location I was, here's what my salary was. And then sometimes they even write reviews on the company. So that can be really helpful when you're researching corporate culture and that kind of stuff. Salary.com, Own It Online. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second here. Salary Expert, PaycheckCity.com, and the NACE Salary Calculator. So I am not a fan of death by PowerPoint. So let's take a little field trip here. And I am going to bring up Own It Online. And I think I even have an exercise for you guys. This is an excellent resource for you. And this is actually helpful in a couple different ways. If you look over here on the right, there's this Own It Interest Profiler. That can be a fun one to do if it's what do I want to be when I grow up, right?
Mm.
Because that'll give you some recommendations as to what are some fields and some job titles you should be exploring. Ty, there's even one on here that is specific to military. So you can put in your MOS and see, maybe I want to do something similar that I did in the military and trying to figure that out. But that can be a really cool one and helpful to check that out. But we can put in different job titles. I mean, all sorts of things. If you want to look for jobs by what's hot, what's hiring right now, look for under occupations this bright outlook. But we're just going to focus specifically on how I can figure out what is this job paying in this particular area. You can look up any area in the country and it'll tell you. So let's look up accountant just for fun. So here's accountants and auditors. It's going to tell me tasks and technology used and work activities and all sorts of great stuff and what training I need. But what's really cool is when I scroll down, 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 down here, ta-da. Now I can look, I'm just going to punch in here 22030. That's Mason's zip. And it's telling me, ooh, very bright outlook, which means above average hiring projected. And then it's going to tell me in the DC area, here's the average. In Virginia, here's the average. And then how that compares to the United States. And so this is going to give you sort of that wonderful range. So if I'm a recent college grad and I am applying at, let's say, RMA Associates, for in this accounting position, I'm probably not going to put $167,000 as I mean, in my fantasy world, right? Never will I ever make
Right.
$167,000 a year. Just saying, especially in my field. But Here's the average, starting 64.4. So that kind of gives you some sort of room here. And then again, depending on what area you're applying in, or is it Northern Virginia versus maybe DC proper? So that can be a really helpful website to use as well. And then you saw kind of some of the other information that was on there, but we always want to look for this little sunshine. And then what's kind of cool is if we go back a page and say, okay, if you're really interested in this, check out these related occupations. So these all have little sunshines after them. So that's giving you some other areas. Now, I digress into career counseling, but just something I want you to be aware of there. My activity for you, check out a job you or a title that you have considered. So if you are a, business analyst concentration at Mason, go ahead and pop in business analyst, data analyst. If you're marketing, whatever it is, pick one of these tools, salary.com, Glassdoor, own it, salary expert, and look for job title and pop it in there, pop in the area that you're looking in, and then put in our chat what you found. What was the job title and what was kind of that range?
Hey Kelly, one thing that I always I try to share with some students and when I'm working with a candidate is gross pay versus net pay. In other
Mm.
words, what they offer total, because that's what you're looking at, versus what you bring home. And you want to think through that because, obviously Uncle Sam, the government's going to take their part. The local government's going to take their part. Are you going to sign up for health care and insurance, or, are you going to stay on your parents if you're in that still age group? All those things are going to factor into what's going to be in your wallet at the end of the day. Keep that in mind as you're thinking through that because you got to pay rent, you got to pay your car, I hope, but some folks have to pay some of those student loans. All those things are going to become factors. So those are factors that you should consider, not just the total gross pay, but also what you're going to bring home. Something to think about. And as you do that, maybe take the gross pay divided by 26, right? Because that's going to be the pay weeks. Every 2 weeks, you're going to get that paycheck. Determine what that is, and then start subtracting out all those things, and then what's going to be in your wallet. So something to think about as you're contemplating the negotiation of a proposed salary.
I am so glad you said that. That certainly, I'm sure you've seen this tie factors in with the military, right? Because they get that housing allowance every month that's going to go bye-bye.
Right.
If they don't, kind of realize, and the health care, and I mean, obviously they can, depending on whether they get to keep TRICARE and all that kind of stuff. But
Right.
boy,
Yeah.
does that make a difference.
It does. It does. That's something that you don't think about until you're out and, well, from my perspective is when I retired, then I really didn't need health care, right?
Mhm.
So minus I do get the dental, just use that as done, in classes, but really that's a bargaining chip. So, but for those things that you have to take into account. And when they say, hey, we offer benefits, it's like a menu. Yeah, we offer you this menu, but you still have to pay for the menu, right? So you have to
Mhm.
decide which meal, which benefit you want to take. And that's something that people don't really consider or think about. College students, and I know that as you get a little bit more experience and then you start being on your own, those are things you have to take into account.
Yeah. All right. Do we have some answers here for what did you find for your salary? What did you look up and what was the range? Oh, data scientist. So in Virginia, the wage for data scientists, that average is 126. So the range is kind of 78 to 197. All right, so depending on what level you're at, if you're just starting out, that kind of give you where you would start asking.
Mhm.
Okay, forensic accountants and analysts was about 110 in the general DC area. And again, this is really handy because not everyone's sticking around here. So if you want to, head down to Virginia Beach, which yes, I do. That was our last duty station. I would move there in the blink of an eye. But if you're, moving back home to wherever and trying to figure out, that's what's really nice about Own It and some of these other tools is you get to put in the local zip code and figure it out. Logistics analyst. Okay. Beautiful. Marketing researcher, 50K to 110. Rodney, tax associate, 64 to 85. Okay. So again, depending on the area, where you're at in your career, I was meeting with a student yesterday who is a double master's student, MBA and master's in finance, and has 10 plus years experience at Capital One and JP Morgan and like all the big players. She can effectively maybe look at the higher end of here because she's got a lot of that work experience already, and a double master's doesn't hurt either. But if I am entering my first job, as I gave the example of out of school and again saw stars and didn't think to ask for more, but could have, but I would have probably been somewhere on that lower range there. Okay, nice work on that, you guys. So here was the results. This was a data analyst in DC. Again, you already saw this in my sample that I brought up live on ONET, but this gives you an example of what to look at. And following Ty's advice, of course, we want to divide this by 26 so that we could see kind of per paycheck, what are we going to be looking at? And then, of course, taxes and everything in between. So now there's this tricky part where, as I ran into the application, it said, what's your desired salary? And as I mentioned, I put in a range that was just high enough on that lower end to be above what they were looking for. And so I didn't get a call back. I will say in this particular organization, I called them and they said, we loved your resume, but you were higher than this. And I said, can you interview me anyway? And they did. And I actually got that job. And that was a scenario where I actually was able to negotiate a signing bonus. So, no, the salary was not where I had put on my application, but I did get a hiring bonus after being there for a year. And we'll talk about other ways that you can negotiate this stuff too. Again, don't price it so low that it's great you got the job, but now you can't pay your bills. But also don't price that lower end of that range so high that you're like, oh, I would have taken it for less. So that's why this kind of research piece of it is so important. And to Ty's point, figuring out what you need to make. And again, trying to get on that higher end, but what are you willing to negotiate there? So if you get put on the spot, again, always offer up a range so that you're not kind of married to one number. Ty, what have you seen kind of being an effective strategy if people are put on the spot? Sometimes in that screening conversation, it's really helpful. In that first phone call, they have
Mhm.
flat out said, here's what we're offering. Is that okay with you? Let's get this out of the way before we even go further versus, kind of the other side of it. But Ty, kind of what have you run into here?
So let's start from the beginning. If I'm screening, I'm a recruiter and I'm going to screen a candidate. We're going to talk about what they're looking for. And then I'll say, what's your desired salary range? We're going to have that conversation, right? Typically, you have something in mind that you want to present, and I'm going to share that information with the hiring manager. Just like Kelly said, they looked at her situation and said, well, we couldn't match that, but they went through anyways and were able to accommodate her. So that's something that has in the beginning the conversation so that we know where we are as a baseline. And then towards the end, you kind of want to stay within that range, but you can also say, what are you going to offer at the end after you've completed all the interviews and they're going to extend an offer to you? And I would always bring up, from the recruiter perspective, we talked about this in the beginning. This is your range, right? And typically we stay within that range. If you go too far out, then we're going to start asking why. And here's maybe some things that you may want to bring out, but let's stay true to what you had said. So I think you have to have understanding what it is from the beginning. And then if that meets your expectations, maybe, don't be afraid to ask for just a little bit more based on that you are the final candidate that we're extending the offer. Typically, when we get to that point, there's not number two, there's not number three, there's only number one. And if we don't work through this one, then we're starting all over again. We're not going to go back to number two and number three. So you have some room there. One thing that I will share with you is if you negotiate a sign-on bonus. So let's say I negotiate sign-on bonus for 2026. So I have my salary is going to be 75, and I negotiated a $5,000 sign-in bonus for this year. Don't think that that's going to carry over, and that's 2026 numbers, right? So that's enough to get you interested and started. But in 2027, you're just going to go with that base salary. You might get a bump and increase, right? Based on, the year's work, but kind of think through that. That sign-on bonus is also taxed a little bit heavier. All right. So keep all that in mind because it's again, there's gross pay and there's net pay after taxes, bonuses, and commissions are taxed a little bit different. So these are things, and I maybe just a little advanced level, but I want you to think about or proactively consider as you're moving forward. One thing that you can also negotiate is time off. Because if you say, well, if we can't, if we can agree on 75 and give me 5 days vacation days to start in the bank, then that's a week's worth of salary,
Right.
right? So then you don't, if something happens, you got to, have an emergency, then you're not having to, go without pay. So those are tools that you can negotiate.
Ty, stop jumping ahead
Oh,
on my
sorry.
PowerPoint.
Sorry.
We'll get into like
We'll
the
get into it.
different things that we can negotiate with that. That's absolutely correct. In fact, I remember somebody in one of my previous jobs, it was like a hire manager role, and it was a nonprofit, and so there wasn't a lot of money to be had. But she successfully negotiated from 2 weeks to 4 weeks because again,
Hmm.
that doesn't
Nice.
really cost their bottom line anything.
Right.
So that's excellent point. Just here's an example, how we answer that salary range. And what we really want to avoid, and I've seen people kind of commit this mistake, and I'm sure Ty, you've seen this as well. Well, I need to make X because this. And it's like if X isn't have anything to do with what you're offering the company, that's not
Right.
a good negotiation strategy. Like, well, it's real. I live in an apartment here and it's super expensive for me to commute here. And like that's a you problem, right?
Right.
That doesn't talk about value or what you have to offer me. And I remember setting somebody up, this kind of goes to interview skills as well, who was saying, well, I need to make this. And then they were saying, why are you interested in the job? And she said, because I just need a job. And it was like, so
Yeah.
interviewing 101. So just moving along here, realize nobody's paying the higher end unless you meet and exceed everything they're looking for. So they're not paying the higher end because your rent's really high or it's too far from this is you applying to work for them. And again, maybe if you're in the position of that double major person who's got 10 to 15 plus years experience that are relevant to that role, you might have a little more, and as you will all be at that point in your career, right? Where you've got enough experience and you kind of can maybe ask for some more things or higher salary, whatever it is. But again, nobody's offering you the very top here unless you can really make the case for that. So we want to present evidence of why you're worth that, not because I need it, not because I got to pay my rent, not because of this or that. So we want to talk about because I believe I'm the best candidate, because I'm bringing this experience, with this thrown in. I've got a lot of AI background, of course, hot topic for everyone. So let's talk about how can we gain some of this experience to stand apart from people and really help our negotiation. Here you have a zillion different tools that you can be utilizing. Forage being one of my favorite. It is such an awesome platform for gaining relevant experience because a lot of times, even with entry level jobs, we run into this problem where I want to apply for this entry level job, but they want some experience. But how do I get this experience if no one's hiring me for an entry level job? So, one that's really helpful where those internships come in. But aside from that, here are some really great opportunities to gain some experience and knowledge. And this, again, is going to give you more negotiating power and experience, so it does relate. It's not just one of my tangents, but this is what Forge looks like. And you can do job simulations for huge companies to build your relevant, and I would put this either under experience or I would put this under relevant projects and coursework. And if you go to the career interest section, AI, as I just mentioned, so hot right now, accounting, banking and finance, data analytics. There's project management and product management and marketing and cyber and supply chain and logistics and all sorts of wonderful things on here. So I'm just going to select one at random here. And what's great is these take less than a day and they are done at your own pace. But these are actual job simulations these companies have put on this platform so that you can gain experience as to like what you would do in that job. So again, you can select career interest. Again, that I'm just going to pull up accounting here. Not teeny companies. Anybody heard of PwC or KPMG, right? These are big players here, and it'll tell you what is the level. So whether it's intermediate or introductory or advanced, how long it should take you. So here's one on corporate tax. It's going to say, why would you bother? Why would you want to do this? You do get a certificate when you're done. Here's a little video. Here's what you're going to do. Here's your role. Here's what you'll do, what you'll learn, what you'll do in each of these tasks. You get to the finish line and it'll give you language to talk about in the interview, which is kind of
Mm.
what we're talking about here, as well as a snippet for your resume. So such a great way to stand apart from the competition, to gain some experience when these employers keep looking for experience, but nobody's hiring without experience and all that stuff. So that was Forage, but all these great opportunities for additional training and certifications to help you stand apart and help you negotiate when you get to that part. We also just put together on the bottom here, here is a link of certificate options by concentration. This will allow you to look up by concentration what are some certifications that are free and quick, and you might want to consider adding on to make yourself more competitive, not only when you're applying for jobs, but in the negotiation piece of it. Okay. And this goes back to what we're just talking about. How do you effectively negotiate? Again, we don't want to just talk about me, and this would really help me because I wanted this and I really need to make this. We want to make the case for why we're worth it. And so here is just sort of like a framework for this. I believe my education skills and experience make me a great candidate. And then we're going to go into the detail. What are those skills? How are you differentiating yourself from others? Based on my research and my skills and experience, I believe X salary, this range would be appropriate. Ty, what language have people used to effectively negotiate with your company?
No, you're spot on here on what they're saying. I believe my education, your degree that you're in, your business acumen, experience, and you might say, well, internships, and I was going to share that internships are great. In my opinion, summer internships are very good. I think the longer you stay in those internships, the better you are, right? So if you're able to work, let's say you get an internship this summer and you're saying, hey, I have some space in my, during my class to work 20 hours, 30 hours, continue working, right? Because that just strengthens your, I believe my education, my work experience. You see that I'm not, balancing schoolwork and work tells me that you're a great time manager. And that's valuable to me because time's important. So I ask you to consider that as you're going along. So those things, and if not, no worries, but you have to highlight what you accomplished, your accomplishments during your internships or during your work, and what you bring to the skill, those soft skills, leadership, strong communication, business acumen, competence. And at the end of the day, confidence, right? If you can do those things, I think that you would be more successful in being able to negotiate a higher salary.
And I think I'm so glad that you touched on kind of those soft skills because certainly one of the things that we really hear from employers is I can teach you the hard skills. I cannot teach you to be pleasant to people. Right? So
Right.
like if you come in with really good communication skills and you're a go-getter and you don't just sit there and wait to be told what to do, but you take initiative, you've used, and again, this is what kind of I love too. I certainly meet with a lot of people who are like, I don't have relevant experience. I was a waitress, I was a bartender, I was working at Giant or Safeway or whatever. And I think what I love to help people see is that you are using some really transferable skills in any kind of customer service role that employers are seeking for real. In fact, I just went to a lunch with an employer 2 weeks ago, and they just said, if I could just get people with the social skills, with that side of it, with the customer service side of it, I can teach you anything else. So really making the case on that resume and in your interview to showcase I have had to calm down angry customers, while keeping my cool and making sure they leave happy. Like, not everybody was thrilled at, when they came into Starbucks where I was working and that kind of stuff. So, what are the communication skills? Are you adapting your communication strategy for the people you're meeting with? Did you have to get up in front of your class and teach them something that you learned through, let's say, a PowerPoint presentation? Again, I just talked about that with a student not an hour ago of showcasing a lot of these skills, presentation skills, public speaking, conflict management. You can do that when you're in a student organization. All these kind of soft skills that come up in just about any role. And so that's just another skill set, especially when we're recent grads and we don't have 15 years experience in the biz to kind of negotiate this higher salary. So what are the pieces that you do offer? Another thing I would recommend is if anybody's familiar with the Clifton Strengths Finder, that is a really good one because it tells you here's what your strengths are, and that gives you language to talk about in an interview, on your resume, what jobs would be a good fit based on these strengths and stuff like that. You can take the Clifton Strengths for free through George Mason.
And that's Donald Clifton, not Tyrone Clifton. It's
Yeah.
not me. We're not Ken folks, but it is a great tool to identify those strengths and areas that you could work on, right? So I share that with you. Kelly, you brought up a lot of great things. And what I tell people when they're looking at Stanley Martin, we say you don't have to know construction. Matter of fact, we don't want you to know construction. What we say is you bring us your problem solving, those customer service skills, that time management, that strong communication, and we'll teach you the Stanley Martin way. Show those soft skills, show that you can do things. I don't know if we have any teaching assistants. Man, that's a great job, right? Because you are managing your peers in class while going to school, 40 to 50 students or however in that class, and you're managing your school, your schoolwork. Same thing, you're working and you're going to school. Most of you are working adults, right? Use that to your advantage versus the student who just goes to class, who doesn't participate, who's not involved in those. That should be a strength right there that you should be able to share why you deserve a higher salary.
So, again, we've already kind of talked about this, but remember when you're negotiating, highlighting your achievements. Again, this can be coursework, this can be volunteer work, this can be anything that would be something they're looking for. But the other piece, and this is sort of like another interviewing 101, expressing enthusiasm and smiling throughout the interview. Ty, I would love for you to speak to this part of it because I feel like I meet with a lot of students who think they have to have the perfect answer to each interview. And I tell them, kind of going to that soft skill side of it, if you just show me you're a personable person who, smiles and sounds excited about the role, and, that will almost get you farther than talking to me with like no affect, but answering all the questions appropriately. And I've had it where people actually read me the chat GPT answers off of a screen, and that was a no-go. I'm not hiring a robot. I am looking
Right.
for personal skills. Ty, what's been your experience?
No, agreed. Bring your energy. If you can exude your energy through the interview process, that'll be discussed with the hiring manager more than, how they answer the question is, that person had a lot of energy, had great answers. You understand that they really are excited about this opportunity. You get the hiring manager excited, they're excited for you, and then they're going to promote you and say, hey, we need to move forward with this person. But also, and I always say that to say, nobody likes to work with a jerk, right? So that teamwork, right? And so, don't be that person, right? If you could have great leadership and problem solving, but if you're a jerk or, and I would say arrogant, that will turn people off also. So kind of keep that in mind.
Mhm.
You don't have to be humble when you're talking about yourself, but you don't want to be arrogant either.
Right, right. So one of the ways we've figured this out is we practice. We
Yep.
practice like crazy. We practice in front of a mirror. You can certainly, we do this in our office where people come in for mock interviews, and I will I actually had one student come in the last month. He had an interview coming up. I think it's for a business analyst role, and he had not been doing well in his interview. So he came in, and I grabbed two other coworkers, and I had come up with questions that he would probably be asked, and we just fired away questions, gave him really honest feedback afterwards, which apparently helped because he emailed me a week later saying he got the job. So that's what we're here for. Again, you don't have to be perfect. That is why you're coming to us for additional help to practice, practice, practice. But again, we'll talk about what are the salary expectations, salary range, why do you think you deserve this? Why are you the best candidate? All those kind of questions that pop up there. And again, we want to remain professional, you become more confident as you go through. It's not something you necessarily have right off the bat. And again, kind of to Ty's point, you wouldn't want to come off as arrogant. So it sounds silly, but we practice in front of a mirror, practice with one of us career advisors. We did introduce a AI tool that will help you practice, which you can also use for resumes, cover letters, coming up with your introduction. Ty, one of the things I'm sure you ask in that interview is tell me about yourself, right? And if you answer that question, what do you want to know? That tells me what I wanted to know was, are you prepared for the interview? You just told me, no, I'm not. This is what it looks like. So you can also scan the QR code there to request access if that works better for you. But when you get access, you are going to get an email from Inspire. That is the company that hosts it. So don't toss that and look in your spam folder if you don't see it. But here we can work on, this is what the platform looks like again, resume, talking about your self-introduction, which also helps for going to career fairs, things like that, and then interviews. And it actually, you record yourself and you get to watch, which is not always easy when you're going through that interview process. So we did talk about how the salary is just one piece of it, right? And as Ty mentioned earlier, vacation time is another thing that we could be negotiating, benefits. The other thing, Ty, I think you did mention this as well. If you, let's say you're offered the job, you don't like the starting salary, and then they do their reviews every year to, talk about possibly getting a higher salary. One of the things that you could possibly negotiate is if, kind of like you said, if I'm working really hard, can we actually do this evaluation in 6 months, in 4 months? So we can discuss how my performance is going, and then based on that, entertain the idea of maybe a raise kicks in at 6 months instead of waiting a whole 12 months. Okay. So signing bonus, vacation time. Sometimes people give, in fact, I think more Mason is one of them where you get free bus passes. If you were employed at Mason and you're going to take the metro, that's an option there. Maybe a hybrid work environment, hiring bonuses, we've already talked about. Professional development, somebody had mentioned that their employer is paying tuition reimbursement. So, and we just talked about maybe negotiating when that review happens. So certainly a bunch of other areas, and especially the nice thing, Ty, we talked about before, that vacation time especially does not really cost their bottom line, right?
Nope. Nope. They just have to account for you at that time. So don't lead with or in the initial conversation, is there remote work? I would stay away from that. The days of COVID are over. Shake hands, you know what I mean? Get close and personal, be comfortable in coming into the office.
Mhm.
That can be a turnoff right there too. I'll just be honest with you. Oh, is there working? We're not doing that, right? And you see that companies are paying, obviously companies are paying for the building to rent. They don't own that, so they have to pay for spaces, all that stuff. So they want to bring people back in the office. So keep that in mind. I share that when I saw that, I was like, I want to bring that out too. We already talked about the benefits are like a menu. You pay for what you order. Do the numbers, right? Look at what's gross versus what's going to come into your pocket and see if that makes sense and then work from there.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you mention that too about the remote work options. One of the things that comes up is people tend to, I think there's some statistic around this, get promoted, and which of course ties into salary as well when they're in the office. And the reason for that they saw is that you are just more likely to rub elbows with higher ups, other people, they see your face on a regular basis versus if you're remote, you're not visible. there are some real consequences to that. I know after COVID, everyone kind of wants to work from home, except for me because I'm an extrovert. But there are some real, downsides to that just financially too. So something to kind of keep in mind going forward there. And then, of course, we want to make sure all this is in writing so that you don't have any surprises. So when you start, like, oh, I thought, like when I closed on my house and I thought that the washer and dryer would be there. And then I showed up ready to do my laundry when I moved in, and there was no washer and dryer. So make sure that we're getting everything in writing there. Here's what we want to avoid. We don't want to say anything negative. We don't want to, again, kind of to that point of, well, I know somebody else who works here and they got paid X, so that's what I want to get paid. Again, you need to make that case that you're worth it. Obviously, being overly aggressive, focusing on your own financial needs. I have bills to pay. I need the money. That kind of stuff is a no-go. Any kind of ultimatums, don't exaggerate. Don't, my career advisor told me I should be making more. And then, of course, Ty's point earlier is that confidence. That is a really big piece. This comes up, the response is like, I don't know if I really deserve higher salary, or I'm not sure if I'm qualified enough, but kind of goes to those interview questions where I've never really done this on the job, but I did kind of cover, it's to a certain extent, Ty, is it a fake it till you make it, right? You kind of need to exude some of that confidence.
Yeah, but I always say it's a fine line. So there's 3 degrees. There's being humble, there's being confident, and then there's being arrogant, right? So you want to stay in that confident, be humble enough, but confident in yourself and what you're doing. You're at school, you're getting your education. That's confident, that shows competence and showing that you're the best candidate for the job. And that's why, again, when you're in the offer stage, you're that number one candidate that they're extending an offer to. They don't have the backup, they'll start to search all over again. Right. So, or they might bring the second, but something about you made you stand out. So use that to your advantage. In the conversation in the link, I put my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to connect with me and follow because we post jobs all the time. As Kelly knows, I send her bi-weekly emails with all our current job opportunities for college students and veterans. So feel free to connect with me so you can receive some information.
Thank you for doing that. So we are certainly here to help you anytime you need it. We have drop-in hours. We have virtual and in-person drop-ins. We have appointments in person and virtual. There's a couple resources you might want to consider here. These are our LinkedIn pages. So on the Costello Career Collective, you can actually meet with other students, alumni, employers are on there, ask questions. And then if we have any international students in the group, there is a networking group specifically for you guys. And then why would you want to follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn? Because you'll sometimes find job opportunities that aren't on Handshake. And I actually do post quite a few ties on our page here too. And then Instagram has some really fun do's and don'ts in more video format. So that would be a good one to follow as well. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Ty, thank you so much for joining us and for lending us
Thank
your
you.
expertise. And we will see you all really soon.
Pleasure meeting everyone. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you, everyone. You all have a great day.
Take care.